Today's guests are very unique. This podcast is all about how we can heal our bodies. And recently, I was in touch with a doctor who found a technique that is changing lives, Dr. Fox. Today, we're bringing on one of his patients that suffered with ALS and went through the treatment and is healing. I'd love to introduce you to Mark Buetow. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. What I'd like to do with my guests is we like to get to know you as a person a little bit. So I'd like you to let us know, where were you born in the world? And maybe you have a favorite childhood memory.
I was born in Crystal, Minnesota.
Okay.
It's a suburb of the Twin Cities. And pretty much, I always say my childhood, my father was a carpenter and my mother pretty much stayed home and never had a driver's license. So,
Really? Okay.
but she was always had the house perfect, cookies after school. So I pretty much grew up in a Leave It to Beaver type situation, if you know that old show on TV.
Yeah, I do.
Very good upbringing. I was in gymnastics in high school and started working as soon as I graduated from high school. I
Okay.
went into the trades. I was a cabinet maker for 3 years, a carpenter for probably 11 years, I think. And then I took a job as a manager for a wealthy family in Minnesota. And I took care of their 5 different properties they had here in Florida, hunting shack in Ortonville, a tennis arena in the cities, and then a working farm in Jamaica. So
Oh,
oversaw all those things and retired at 65 and moved up here. We're on the Mississippi River. We have 34 acres, and
wow.
a dream and a prayer come true that we found this land. And I've always loved working. I work hard. I used to work all day at work and come home and work or take side jobs to get ahead of myself. And we saw it time to sell our house in Plymouth. We lived down in the cities. It was a good time for the market, so we moved up here. And there was a small cabin, still is. And at 65, retired, and I just got to work on this property. And I probably did too much, hurt my back, and they thought it was stenosis. So I went and had a surgery. And when I came out, I just wasn't healing. They checked me out and they said they saw some signs of maybe ALS, so I should get checked out. So I went to a neurologist and she thought that's what it was. And it was just such a shock to me because I've been healthy my whole life. And I always say at 65, I could still climb a tree as good as a kid could.
Wow.
So,
I'd like to pause there and bring in Dr. Fox, whose video is not working, unfortunately. And Dr. Fox, if you can quickly, before he continues his story, tell us, what is ALS?
So in medicine, we always use names that nobody else understands. We have abbreviations for everything. So this one stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which doesn't make any sense, does it? But what it means is that something is attacking your nerves, and the signal from the nerve doesn't get through to your muscles. So you become more and more weak. Your muscles just don't work anymore. Popularly known as Lou Gehrig's disease, because at the height of his baseball career, the Hall of Fame All-Star Lou Gehrig announced his retirement. He was a teammate of Babe Ruth, but he said he had to retire because of this condition. And a very famous line in his farewell speech was, despite the bleak prognosis that he was facing, he said he considered himself the luckiest man in the world to have played with that team in front of those fans. So, as happened to Lou Gehrig, this is a progressive muscle weakness, and eventually the patients really can't move a muscle. They become bound to wheelchairs. They can't lift a finger, and eventually they can't even breathe. Their breathing muscles are so weak.
Wow.
And so at that point, they typically have to have some kind of a breathing machine to help them breathe. Many people are familiar with the famous story of Stephen Hawking, the brilliant British astrophysicist who spent decades in a wheelchair with an artificial voice. That's what we're talking about here. There are, at least before COVID, estimated to be about 5,000 cases per year. I think it's gone up as a result of COVID. Typically, these people can live for maybe 3 to 5 years, but eventually they can't breathe anymore, and most of them die of complications. They all die. This is a uniformly fatal disease, has no effective treatment. It's basically like getting a death sentence.
Until today.
Until today, that's right. Let me pause there because maybe Mark wants to pick up the story at that point.
Yeah. Mark, where were you when you said that you were diagnosed and you were searching for answers? So how did you find Dr. Fox and their team?
It was 2 years I had gone to the Mayo and they did all the tests and said I had ALS. And we were closer to go to Duluth, so I switched there. They did all the tests and said I had ALS too. So pretty much like Richard said, you just have to deal with it. There's nothing they can do. And so prayer has been a big part of my life, but I just tried to stay as healthy as I could. Both my wife and I try to eat healthy, and we were always exercising and doing yoga. And but I found myself, I couldn't do those things anymore. And it just progressively got worse and really having a hard time breathing. And again, our family, so everybody was praying for me. And one day, Richard's wife, my cousin Wendy, she reached out because it was my mother's birthday. My mother had passed a few years ago. And I thought I should call Wendy back. And when I called back, I told her about my ALS. And she told Richard, and Richard texted me and said I should give him a call. And that's how I made the connection, or else that would have never happened. And I'd still be without any hope on this earth. So,
Can you describe to the audience how far progressive was this disease when you found Dr. Fox?
yeah, it got to the point where my breathing was, it was pretty bad. And I couldn't sleep without a BiPAP machine. If I lay down and try to breathe, I just can't breathe. So I had to have that machine to help me. It got to the point I couldn't walk more than 10 feet without being totally out of breath. So I have a little walker I'd have to use. Just simple tasks like going to the kitchen and getting a cup of coffee. I'd sit down and I'd just be totally wiped out. My legs felt like lead. My core muscles were so weak where it just made me want to fold over forward. My neck was getting so sore. I just couldn't hold up my head. I couldn't do simple things like even a Ziploc bag, you zip them, open them up. So I'd have to have my wife, if I wanted to get to something, she'd have to open them. She'd have to do my buttons on my shirts because I couldn't, my fingers, they still worked and I still had some strength, but
That must have just been like the one of the worst feelings to feel, just slipping away and
yeah, it
being
really was. And
helpless.
yep, my wife had to do all the heavy lifting for me. So it was getting to the point where, very concerning. And just through that phone call to Richard, he's so compassionate. He got me in their schedule and got me right out there and had the procedure done. And right away, I wouldn't be sitting here talking this calmly now. I'd be gasping for air.
So tell us, so you went to New Jersey,
Yep.
and how long total was the procedure, and how long after was it until you were actually able to start functioning normal again?
The procedure was the first day we just met with Richard and Dr. Zhao. And the next day they took my blood out and took the white blood cells out and captured them. And they brought them to the lab and introduced the stem cells. The next day they put them back in me. And then the fourth day I came back for a visit and already I had some feeling of strength. My breathing was a little better. And I've been sending Richard my lung test every day and they just keep getting better and better. I don't think it's things didn't change overnight, and every day I feel a little something better, something different.
And how many procedures did you just do? One?
Just one, and then
Okay.
I'm set up for another one next Friday. And this is with my stem cells. And Richard can probably tell you about that procedure,
Yeah.
but
I'd love to know more about that because I've just learned about the umbilical stem cells. But what, Dr. Fox, what probability of people that get Lou Gehrig's, and you kind of answered this, but I just want to drive home the point. What percentage of people that get this disease can make it out?
Zero.
Okay. Just to
There are
put it
no,
plain.
yep. There are, up until we've treated maybe 2 or 3 other patients in addition to Mark, but until this treatment, there was no hope for this disease, no hope of even stopping it, much less reversing it. And he's really a miracle. I remember sitting there in the office the day after we gave him his cells back, and he came in the next morning and we asked him to show us if he could lift his arms, show us any of his strength. And he was clearly much better the next day. I remember thinking to myself, the world has not seen anything like this for about 2,000 years.
Yes. No, it is a miracle. And it's so beautiful to witness. And I've seen your video, and we will actually play it for watchers that want to see the massive transformation. And what right now, so you went from not being able to zip a Ziploc. And for those of you that aren't watching, when you were saying that, you lifted up your hands very rapidly and zipped a Ziploc bag. So you're making those movements. You're like, what has come back to you since you've had this one treatment? And by the way, how long ago from today was that treatment?
I think 10 days, 9 or 10 days. And so actually the shirt I have on, I button it myself.
Amazing.
Couldn't do before. I can walk short distances and not be overwhelmed. And I don't know if you have the video. I usually had to hold my hands on my hips or else I could tip right over. And I don't have to do that now.
Oh,
I'm sleeping much better. Again, every day I blow on the machine. I think Richard, it was 195 yesterday. It was 200 today.
wow.
Yeah, every day is
Amazing.
it just
Amazing.
it's hard to even explain when you can't breathe. It's a different world. And now just to sit here and talk, and if I stop talking, I can actually close my mouth where before I'd be actually huffing and puffing to. So I'm very thankful. I have a ways to go still. That I think it's going to take a little time. That's a part I don't understand, how the stem cells, how they keep working and free things up. But I can see a movement already. Before I said I couldn't cough, sneeze, laugh, or cry. And I actually cried once and I could breathe, which before, if I tried, I could not breathe at all. And I had a couple little laughs here in the last couple of days.
Amazing.
That's good, yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that. And Dr. Fox, as a medical professional and knowing about all of these diseases and being tied back and you couldn't offer a solution, how does that feel to you to be at the heart and the center of this massive transformation that is about to explode into the world?
It's very exciting, obviously. I have to give the credit to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Yong Zhao, who invented this procedure. It took him many years to come up with it. He then started this company called Throne Biotechnologies. That's our company. It's a biomedical startup company. He originally developed this treatment for type 1 diabetes. He's an immunologist, not an endocrinologist, but he developed this for type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune disorder. The interesting thing was that a lot of the type 1 diabetes patients turn out to have other autoimmune disorders as well.
Hmm.
For instance, a lot of times they have thyroid problems. Some of them have digestive problems like celiac disease. And when he treated the people for their type 1 diabetes, then their other conditions got better at the same time. So what it showed was that this treatment works at a very fundamental level to correct the dysfunction, the malfunction of the immune system. And so that dysfunction can manifest itself as a lot of different autoimmune diseases, but it's in a lot of ways, it's the same basic malfunction. So we've treated a lot of different autoimmune disorders, including obviously type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's disease, Sjogren's syndrome, lupus, Crohn's disease, autoimmune diseases affecting all different organs in the body. And we use the same treatment for all of them. We don't tailor it to any specific condition because it seems to work at a very fundamental level to fix all of the problems that you have with your immune system. So it's very exciting because now we have a way to treat a lot of problems that we just couldn't treat very effectively before. Or in many cases, the treatment was almost as bad as the disease. That is, we would use drugs to suppress the immune system, like steroids, to suppress the immune system, but they had a lot of side effects on their own. More recently, we now have these biologic drugs. We see them advertised on TV every night. They are tailored specifically to a specific autoimmune disease. So they don't treat everything that you've got, and they're very expensive, and sometimes they have complications that result from them. That's why they always read off all these complications during these commercials. So our stem cell treatment is interesting that way because we don't find any immune suppression or complications of this treatment. People don't have to take any immune suppressing drugs. It's not like getting cancer treatment where you just feel really sick all the time. I know one patient who finished her treatment, and that night she went over to New York City to watch a Broadway play. This doesn't require a lot of downtime. So it's
Amazing.
really an ideal treatment in many respects.
And what is this treatment now? So the one that you did prior was with umbilical cord stem cells. So now you're going to use Mark's stem cells?
So I'll just have to get a little bit technical here, but I'll try
Okay.
to keep it fairly simple. So there are a lot of stem cell treatments that are being developed these days, and the stem cells can either be your own or come from someone else. In the United States, the FDA does not allow people to use stem cells from other people. You have to use your own stem cells. And so where do they get them? You can get them from your blood. If you take blood out and filter it, you can get stem cells from the blood out of your veins. A lot of times now stem cells are being recovered from abdominal fat tissue. Those are probably the two most common sources. So then they will purify those stem cells and either inject them locally, like you have a painful knee. So maybe the stem cells are injected into the knee joint or the shoulder, something like that. Or sometimes they're just injected into your veins to go wherever they want to go. Our treatment at Throne is a bit different. I like to call it an indirect stem cell treatment. So we first collect the cord blood from newborn babies. After the baby is born and the umbilical cord is clamped, there's often a lot of blood left in the placenta, and you can recover that blood, oftentimes 5, 6, 7 ounces of blood. The stem cells that are in the cord blood of a newborn are far more powerful than what we adults have. So we get that cord blood from a commercial blood bank service, and they FedEx them to our lab in New Jersey. And there we separate the stem cells from the cord blood and put them in a cell culture device where they settle in and grow for several weeks. During that time, the population of cells expands. We check them regularly to make sure that they're healthy and not contaminated with anything. And then after about 3 weeks or so, they're ready to be utilized in our procedure. So
Wow.
at that point, then patients like Mark come to New Jersey and they come to our clinic and they get an IV line put in each arm. And it's a little bit like a dialysis procedure in that the blood comes out of one arm, it goes through a filtering machine, and then back into the other arm. So that filtering machine separates out the white blood cells from the red blood cells. The red blood cells go back in the other arm, the white blood cells go into a collection bag. And at the end of about 5 or 6 hours, we have enough cells, the white cells collected. So the patient is released from their IV lines and they can go back to the hotel and take it easy. Their white cells go down the hall where they get married up to those stem cells that have been growing for the last 3 weeks. So the patient cells get layered on top of the umbilical cord stem cells. And then there's some sort of magic that happens that we don't totally understand at this point. It appears that the umbilical stem cells release some factors, molecules, or small cell fragments that we call exosomes. So those seem to get released by the cord cells and then get taken up by the patient's cells. I think our process is a lot more efficient than some others because the patient cells are sitting right on top of the stem cells. They're physically right together. They don't have to try to search around your whole body and find each other to get married up.
Yeah.
I like to call it sleeping together. They sleep together and magical things happen. So after sleeping together overnight, then the patient cells that have now been, shall we say, reborn or rebuilt, re-engineered, we collect those. The umbilical cord stem cells have attached themselves to that cell culture apparatus. So it's pretty easy to separate them. We just rinse the patient cells off of the cord blood cells, collect them in a bag, and then the patient comes in that morning and we give them back their own reborn stem cells. And in some cases, it seems like, particularly people who we've seen have had some neurologic difficulties, it seems like we can even see hints of improvement before they're even done with the infusion, before the day is over. It seems maybe they're a little bit stronger. And then we have them come back the next morning so we can see how they're doing. And as Mark reported in his case, he was already feeling stronger and he could show us that he was stronger. So it's really quite miraculous. The same week that we treated Mark, we treated another ALS patient, a 74-year-old woman. And she had a similar, perhaps even more impressive recovery because by the next morning, she was obviously able to lift her arms up and wave them around much, much more than she could the day before. And in fact, she told us how she had played catch that morning with a stuffed animal toy with her 6-year-old granddaughter, which she could never have done before.
That's so beautiful.
She was so thrilled to be able to just do the grandmother thing with her daughter that she'd been unable to do. That's a miraculous thing about this, is so many things that we take for granted that we do every day, and these patients simply cannot do them. They may not be able to cut their food up. They may not be able to get a fork to their mouth. Things that we just take for granted every day. And they're so grateful for just being able to get back these everyday pleasures that we all
You take for granted. Yeah.
Yes.
That's amazing. Thank you for explaining all of that.
So one more thing, if I
Yes.
can. So Mark will be going back in a week or so for a follow-up treatment. I like to call it either a booster treatment or a topping up sort of thing, because when we collected his treated white cells from that cell culturing apparatus, some of them get left behind or maybe stuck, something like that. So if we leave them in that cell culture apparatus for another 15, maybe 20 days, they grow. And so we will then have a whole nother population of patient stem cells. And so the patient can come back and get a second treatment, more of their own stem cells. But these seem to be those magical stem cells that have these magic properties, not like the ones that we collected from them in the first place.
So where did you collect the ones that you're going to use on the next treatment from?
So these were collected with that original collection,
Okay.
and we were in that overnight cell culture from the first treatment, but we are not able to harvest all of them, so there are some left over, what I call the leavings.
Okay.
And it
Got it.
turns
Got
out
it.
we can culture the leftover cells and they will grow, they'll multiply several times over. And so then we'll have a bunch more stem cells that we can give the patient when they come back in a couple of weeks. So it's a booster.
That's fascinating. And are there other treatments in the world that are like this? Are they similar, or are you guys really just a one-off in the way that you're doing the treatment?
I'm not aware, there are stem cell programs outside the United States, for instance, in Central America, South America, the Caribbean, where they're not regulated by the FDA. And I think some of those may be using somewhat similar technologies, but the data that they report isn't very detailed as far as how well it works. It's a little hard to compare. We have pretty extensive data on the treatment of type 1 diabetes patients because we've done hundreds of those. Now we're starting to get into some of these other conditions for which there aren't really effective treatments. And we've only got a handful of cases in those. So it's very much an experimental process at this point. People need to understand that we don't know for sure that it's going to work. Certainly Mark didn't know for sure it was going to work, but he knew for sure what was going to happen if he didn't get some help. That's a lot of the folks who come to us are in that situation. I should say also, just by way of full disclosure, because there's a regulatory overlay to all of this under the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA has set up a website for clinical research trials. And we have 3 FDA registered clinical trials going on now, one for type 1 diabetes, one for autoimmune hair loss. People lose their hair because of autoimmunity, called alopecia. And the third clinical trial we have going on is for people with post-COVID syndrome. And there's lots and lots of those, probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people with those conditions. But there are some other conditions like here, ALS, Parkinson's, and so forth, where we do not have clinical trials, but we are allowed to treat those trials under President Trump's 2018 statute called the Right to Try Act, which allows patients who have serious life-threatening conditions that don't have any adequate treatment to try experimental treatments. And that is outside of the FDA's regulatory process. So we have to be clear with people that these are experimental treatments, that we don't guarantee results, but if we can help them, we want to be able to help them.
Absolutely. And how far away are you from the FDA approval with the diabetes?
We are well along in that process. About a year ago, the FDA approved us for admission into what I call their fast track approval process. Another President Trump statute called the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Technologies statute. It was designed to speed up the regulatory approval for some of these new high technology treatments. The FDA approved us to the RMAT program. So now we have some additional hurdles to get past, but hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, we will have full FDA approval for this for the treatment of type 1 diabetes. At that point, we may find that the insurance companies will be starting to be willing to provide coverage for this, because right now it's an experimental treatment and insurance plans generally don't cover it.
Yeah. What are the costs of insulin for diabetics?
I have to say, I'm not exactly sure, but I know they're pretty high
Yeah.
because there's been a lot of talk about that. In fact, I think under President Trump's budget reconciliation bill, I think they're trying to put price limits on the on insulin because it's pretty high, pretty
So expensive.
outrageous,
Yeah.
particularly for young children, teenagers. I think in the long run, our treatment is a lot less expensive than
Oh,
insulin for the rest of your life. Plus, it's a quality of life issue too, of
quality of
course.
life. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I don't think that the pharmaceutical companies are going to like it, but I think that there are a lot of happy customers in the pipeline that can't wait to get this treatment to start reversing and improving conditions. Mark, what was the first thing that you did? Was there something that you said, once I regain my movement, I'm going to do this? And I don't think it was zipping a Ziploc bag.
Hopped on the lawnmower the other day. I have a big lawnmower, and
Ah,
when my neck was fine, my body was fine. I just love being outdoors, sat in the sun for about an hour, took my shirt off.
amazing. And there's more to come,
Yes, yep.
more healing to come.
That feeling of to have hope again is undescribable.
Absolutely. That was so beautifully said, the feeling of hope, because even though these aren't FDA approved treatments, when you see the proof of patients like yourself, Mark and Dr. Fox, you've seen a lot more than what I've seen. I've only seen a few. That word hope is so powerful because you do have the hope of healing and getting back to yourself and being around family and just doing things that you love to do. So, what is more beautiful than that? Dr. Fox, thank you for the tireless service in the hours. I know that you just pour yourself into doing this for people. It's really a servant's heart. I appreciate that. And using your medical expertise. And by the way, Dr. Fox is also an attorney, so he's very ambitious. And Mark, for your willingness to try this. You had nothing to lose. And it's miraculous. It's
So, yeah,
really beautiful. Is there anything that you would like to add, Mark?
I was going to say too that having this is so hard to see, like my wife having to deal with a husband that just isn't really there anymore. And I have two grandkids, and my daughters and two sons from Cindy's side. It's just, it's sad to see them come and visit and see me getting worse and worse. And now they're seeing the change, and it just is very joyful.
It's very joyful. That makes my heart joyful. Thank
Thanks.
you. Dr. Fox, would you like to add something at the end?
No, it's just very gratifying to be able to help folks in Mark's situation. It's one of the reasons you go into medicine is to provide cures and hope for people who are oftentimes suffering and both physically and spiritually. So it's very gratifying.
And what would you tell your patients after they've had a treatment? Is there anything that you would say, don't do this anymore? Or do you say, go back to your regular life?
I guess my advice to Mark was to try to get back to his usual activities, but just don't fatigue yourself too much because the body does need healthy rest and healthy food in order to recover. But no, we don't have any specific limitations on this. And as I said, it's nice because you don't have to take a bunch of drugs for a long period of time that cause a lot of side effects
Yeah,
and slow you down or whatever. I just advise people try to resume your normal life as your condition permits.
it's beautiful. And Mark, one of the questions that I asked Dr. Fox on our last interview, so I'm going to reserve this question for you. I ask every guest, if this was the last message that you had to broadcast out to the world, what would it be?
It would truly have to be that wherever you are in your situation in life, if there's troubles, if there's urgencies, pray to God because He's listening. And it was so clear when I hooked up with Richard that God opened that door. So that's my message.
Beautiful. Thank you. Gentlemen, it has been a true pleasure. And Dr. Fox, I can't wait for the next patient to bring on this podcast to share their story. And just if you're looking for this treatment, if you know of somebody, which I think every single person listening knows of someone who has diabetes or different conditions, how can they get in touch with you, Dr. Fox?
First of all, we have a website. It's patients, like PATIENTS, Throne Bio, THRONEBIO.com, thronepatients.thronebio.com, and there's a contact form on there. In fact, we're working on the website daily to try to make it work better for people, but there's a contact form. People can get in contact with me. One of the other pitches that I would like to make is I have a particular interest in treating children. That was originally my training was in pediatrics, although I treat people of all ages now, but I'm particularly interested in children with autoimmune disorders, like young children with new onset of type 1 diabetes. We like to get them treated within the first 12 to 24 months because they recover a lot faster if we get them earlier. And I'm also very interested to start looking at children with autism as regressive autism, where the child was fine and then they got a vaccine and then they regressed into autism, because we haven't studied any of those children so far, but I'm very interested to get into that group because of the fact that it's apparently a vaccine-induced injury, that vaccines induce inflammation. And so we have a strong suspicion that autism involves inflammation and involves autoinflammation. And we think that we have a treatment for autoinflammation that works in a lot of other neurologic conditions and may well work for that condition. So that would be that as a pediatrician, that's the next area that I'd like to look at. Thank you very much for the opportunity to spread the word on your show. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy to do that. That's what this platform is all about. And if you're listening, please share this with a friend who doesn't need to know about this. Dr. Fox, thank you. I will put all the contact information in the show notes. And Mark, I am so happy to follow your progress as you come back basically to life and get in the game and hold your grandchildren, ride your lawnmower, walk up and down stairs, be outdoors, and just be part of life. It's really a beautiful thing to observe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening. And everyone else, until next time, be well.